There have been several debates recently spawning out of the release of the new show, The Acolyte, ranging from the ever-silly fires in space to which is deadlier, lightsaber or knife. And that's not even considering the debate about how woke this show is, whatever that means. I actually know that it refers to not liking something existing in media and hiding behind virtue signaling a political message being expressed from oneself, but projected onto the media in question, done in order to create an enemy where none exist, in an effort to self-victimize and express innate superiority over those behind the creation of the media. A silly little contradiction. With that little rant out of the way, allow me to return to the actual topic of this video, the scientific logistics on display in Star Wars. This, of course, is not something that is spent a significant amount of time on in any Star Wars media, outside of the companion books. There is a simple and easy explanation for that. And no, it's not that the creators don't care about their media, it's due to esoteric storytelling, but more on that later. For now, let us focus on lightsabers. If you're an avid fan of Star Wars today, you may notice that there is a tendency for people to get stabbed with these laser swords in big dramatic moments. And sometimes people survive these stabbings, or cuts. Cuts happen too. Even so, it is shown to be a severe injury, and that survival from its damage is all but guaranteed. But the thing about lightsabers is that they function primarily as swords with perfect penetrative qualities, with the added bonus of being a source of both light and heat. It is essentially more stylistic than scientific. If Qui-Gon's lightsaber was capable of melting through the door as shown, he wouldn't be able to hold it in his hands due to the immense heat that should come off of it. This is due to Star Wars being every bit as much a fantasy as it is a science fiction. With the Force and all being what it is, a MacGuffin intended to empower the religious characters in the universe and add a sense of impossible wonder and mystery. That may seem like I'm hand-waving the argument here, and I am, but the issue is that the argument mistakes the forest for the trees. The point of realism in both sci-fi and fantasy is completely moot. Now let me clarify before anyone jumps to conclusions or pauses the video awkwardly. In-universe realism is not the same as out-of-universe realism. This to say that we as an audience have to allow the work itself to establish what is and is not realistic. That which is shown to be real within this illusion called fiction becomes realistic through its own internal application within each individual work. It is ultimately a question of how the work handles itself when expressing its ideas, gimmicks, and MacGuffins. The work must be allowed to present its own internal logic rather than how well does it adhere to our external logic. Then the question becomes how much time should be spent explaining the science in the universe, and how necessary for understanding the plot and narrative is this information. If it's ever the case that the information could be superfluous to the narrative, then leaving it as an esoteric element in the story is often the better choice. This to prevent pacing issues and avoiding holding seminars about little details that doesn't do much of, if anything, for the narrative at hand, which instead allows the audience to form their own headcanon of how something works based on what has been shown, enabling the world to feel more alive. And this is a great segue into the fires in space discourse, which is every bit as silly as it may sound. For starters, Star Wars has always had issues with this bit of realism. Most every space battle has featured ships being brought to their demise in fiery explosions. It should of course not be possible for such dramatic events to occur in space, and yet it has been a staple of Star Wars since the release of the very first movie. Not to mention the engine fire scene from The Phantom Menace, which introduces R2-D2. This consistency in Star Wars canon is conveniently forgotten about by those peddling this argument. But ironically, when an actor slips up and says the wrong name in an interview, twice can still be a slip up, it's an insult to Star Wars canon and lore. If you want to actually know more about how fire works in space, you can always Google the NASA Flex experiment. There are plenty of interesting information to be learned about this subject, but Star Wars is not school and it shouldn't come under scrutiny for failing at an out-of-universe realism. I would like to take a moment here and address how these two arguments, as discussed, are ideal examples of bad faith argumentation. Both are presented by those peddling the argument as complete slam dunks on the show for failing a simple reality check. The intent behind these arguments are also simple. A dismissal of the show's potential quality. And as is often the case, the argument has been co-opted by people attempting to portray everything Star Wars related as simply doomed due to some not-so-secret DEI messaging. Essentially utilizing these simplistic arguments as a shield from scrutiny of their disgusting and bigoted behavior. These oversimplifications of critique blends together until those with genuine issues and criticism of the work are indistinguishable from the simpletons. This lumping together inevitably causes more arguments and strife within an already contentious fandom, thus making the follow-up talking point of "if you dislike the work, you're under attack by shills" more believable. There is a solution to this dilemma, and, ironically, it can be found within the concept of Brandolini's law. This concept states that the amount of effort required to refute bullshit is an order of magnitudes greater than it is to spew it. This to say that in order to ensure those with malicious intent remain identifiable, everyone who wishes to critique any work of art, but especially Star Wars currently, must not allow themselves to make simplified arguments. Instead, endeavor to express their perspective of the work, be it positive or negative, in a thoughtful manner with as much effort as possible. Should all those with genuine criticism distinguish themselves through such methods, those who seek to use these arguments as shields for their bigotry would inevitably out themselves, for they do not possess the critical thinking required to properly and genuinely express such ideas. And with that, I think it's time to bid everyone adieu.